Good morning, everyone. Let me welcome you to Hall Brill. This is 26th June, and the topic for today is tackling toricity. Let me quickly introduce chairpersons, Dr. Swati Agrawal, Dr. Shilpa Godkani, and we have 6 speakers. Please make note, 10 minutes for speaking and 2 minutes for general discussion or Q&A. So I'd like to request Dr. Swati Agrawal and Dr. Shilpa to please take it ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjay. So good morning, AIOS, and welcome to the world of tackling toricity. Now, in an era where even a 0.5 diopter cylinder is not acceptable many a times by our patients, we need to tackle our toricity in the most precise way. And I'm Dr. Swati Agrawal from Kolkata, and my co-chairperson would be Dr. Shilpa Kodkani from Belgaum, and we are going to host this session. And Dr. Shilpa is a prolific surgeon, a phaco-refractive surgeon from Karnataka, and is going to brief us about LRIs, OCCIs, and more. Let's hear from her.
Thank you, Swati, for the introduction. I'll start with sharing my slides. Can you see the slides?
No, ma'am, not yet. Yeah, now we can see. Now we can see a Zoom page.
See it now?
We can see a Zoom page now. Just open the slide.
Just a second. Swati, can we go to the next talk? I will just get my slides ready by then.
Okay, then you need to unshare.
Yeah, you can stop sharing. Thank you.
Yeah, so the next talk is by Dr. Nikhil. Dr. Nikhil, are you ready with your talk?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Should I share my screen?
Yes, please. And Dr. Nikhil is from Mumbai, practicing in Santa Cruz, and he's again a very precise surgeon and likes to do his calculations that way. Let's hear from him.
Good morning, one and all. My topic for today is what's your game plan, planning and toric IOL calculations. Now, planning for a toric IOL calculation is the most important step before we go ahead and actually implant one. The first thing that we all need to do is to confirm the amplitude of the cylinder. So obviously we see the patient's acceptance, and also we use 2 different modalities. That means 2 instruments which give us the keratometry. So here I have shown the keratometry, 1 on an IOL master and 2 on a pentacam. On the left is a list of the different instruments available and their principles. So it is always preferable to use a machine with a different principle and compare it to another one and be 100% sure before we proceed to go ahead and implant a toric IOL. What we use as a topographer regularly is the pentacam, and this is a Holiday EKR detailed map. This gives us the zone by zone toricity as we see at the 1, 2, 3, 4 mm zones. Now, here is a case example of an irregular cornea. If we see here, the EKR 65 mean, which is given by the EKR map, shows us that the toricity is skewed, is not very widely skewed, it is clubbed together, and the amplitude of the toricity also is very close by. So this is a irregular cornea and is a very good candidate for a toric IOL. As compared to this, which we see where the toricity is very vastly skewed, there are no tall peaks. And even if we see here, the EKRs, the astigmatism EKR 65 is widely skewed from 1.43 diopters to 0.22 diopters. And such a patient will not do well with a toric IOL and should be, and a simple monofocal IOL should be implanted in them. Now, what are the different errors in measurement while planning for a toric IOL? Is one of them is a work we did at my alma mater, Narayan Netralaya, where if the patient is not touching the headband of the instrument properly, it can cause not only a difference in the amplitude, but also a difference in the axis of the cylinder. Up to 10-degree difference in the axis and 1 diopter in magnitude can be seen. Now coming to the IOL calculations can either be done by various online calculators or image-guided systems. The online calculators can obviously be the Barrett's toric IOL calculator, which is freely available on the ASCRS and APACRS websites, or individual company calculators which are available. Image-guided systems like the Callisto and Virion have inbuilt calculation systems, and one can proceed with that too. Coming to the online calculators, like I said, the Barrett Online Toric Calculator. This is freely available on the website. You have to enter the different keratometry values, the axial length, the anterior chamber depth, your refraction, your SIA, which is a surgically induced astigmatism, which one can calculate on the Dr. Hill's website. The lens thickness and white to white can also be added, which gives you more accurate readings because it also takes into consideration the effective lens position. This is the sheet which you get later on. The importance of Barrett Toric calculator is that it also takes into consideration the posterior corneal astigmatism, which plays a role also. It also takes into consideration the effective lens position, like I said, and hence gives you more accurate values. Now, why is taking PCA into consideration important? Is because if PCA is ignored, in a case of with the rule astigmatism, you usually have overcorrection, and against the rule astigmatism, you usually have undercorrections. Now, coming to there are various different company calculators based on which toric IOL you are placing, which is freely available. Now, coming to the image-guided systems, I'm going to be talking in brief about the Virion image-guided system. This is the pre-op planning sheet where we see where what you can first do is compare your keratometry from your optical biometer like the Lenstar or the IOL Master to the Virion keratometry done. You can see which axis, which K readings on the axis are the closest, and choose that. Once you enter the biometry data, you could even select which formula you want. It has a list of different formulas, including the Barrett's IOL formula. And based on this, you can also fashion where you want to place your incisions, the width of the incision, and you can decide based on that which toric IOL to go in for. If you want, you can also, with the toric IOL, even have a paired arc if you want to do a combined procedure. Now, this is how the page looks eventually. It also gives you the option for an SIA optimization where you can optimize. You can put in the value. You don't need to do it online. You put in all your pre and post-op keratometry values here itself, and you can optimize your SIA. Obviously, intraoperatively, it gives you the overlay on your microscope for which you can make sure you can do a proper IOL placement. I'll just run through a few case examples in which we can decide whether we should go ahead with a toric IOL or not. The first example here is of a patient who accepts only a 0.25 cylinder. When we did his pentacam on the topography, the astigmatism shows a 1.4 diopter. Now, what we fail to understand is why is there a discrepancy? And if there is a discrepancy, should we be putting a toric IOL or just a simple plain monofocal IOL? Now, here comes the role of an aberrometry. What we see on an aberrometer, an eye trace aberrometer gives us all three, that is the internal, corneal, and the total eye values, aberrations. The internal is the aberrations that is induced by the lens. So what do we see here? That the patient has a high corneal astigmatism, but which is compensated by the lens. The lens is here compensating for that. And that is why overall the patient has a low total astigmatism and he is accepting a very low amplitude of cylinder. But on removal of the lens, the cylindrical, the corneal astigmatism will be manifested, and hence this patient would do well with a toric IOL. A second example here, the patient accepts a cylinder of 2 diopters and even the topography shows a similar value. No discrepancy in this case, and a toric IOL can very well be planned for this patient, which is again proved by the aberrometry, which shows the corneal astigmatism to be high, very low internal astigmatisms, and that is why the patient accepts also preoperatively a high cylinder. Coming to my final case example, here the patient accepts a cylinder of 1.75 diopters, but shows a very low astigmatism on the keratometry. Again, the discrepancy where we don't know what to do, and we fall back to our tool, the aberrometer. Here again, what we see is the corneal astigmatism is relatively low as compared to the lenticular astigmatism. And hence, on removing the lens, the lenticular astigmatism is gone and only the low corneal astigmatism is there. And one need not use a toric IOL for correction of same. So toric IOLs, in what degree of astigmatism can we go ahead and implant one? With the rule astigmatism, preferably only above a diopter. Against the rule astigmatism, with the new tools right now today, even anything above 0.7 diopters should be corrected with a toric IOL. What about the higher range? So usually all the different companies correct up to 4.5 diopter cylinder with a toric IOL. That is the T9 version is mostly the highest. Over and above that, you need to customize your IOL. You get the Ultima group, the Acreol group can customize a toric IOL for high degrees of astigmatism too. Here we see a patient of almost 12 diopters of astigmatism. You can get a customized IOL and the patient does well with that. Coming to the last point of IOL, toric IOL stability. So usually toric IOLs are very stable. The newer generation IOLs fuse well with the posterior capsule and hence do not rotate. But in patients with axial length more than 25 millimeters, that is high myopes, they usually show poor toric IOL stability. These are the papers which have already been published and it's well documented. So what we do intraoperatively in these patients is that we implant a CTR ring. And we have seen in a study that we've undertaken at our center that implantation of a toric IOL with a CTR ring shows better stability and no rotation as compared to when a CTR is not placed in a high myope, there's a rotation of a toric IOL. And as we well know, a rotation of a toric IOL can per degree rotation, there is a 3.3% loss of dioptric power. And hence we advocate that all patients above an axial length of 25 should also be implanted with a CTR prior to the toric implant. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Nikhil. It was a very elaborate and a very excellent presentation. Congratulations
Thank
to
you,
you.
ma'am.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask you, like a patient comes to your clinic, so and he needs a cylinder, right? He has a cylinder, you've done a calculation, but the patient is also suffering from a mild dry eye. So would you give him some lubricants and then ask him to come back, or do you proceed? Like, what is your take at that time?
Definitely, ma'am. We would first want to correct the dry eye problem also, because in a patient of dry eye, the keratometry values may also vary. We've seen there is a discrepancy in the keratometry values. Hence, I would start the patient on lubricants and other treatment for the dry eye first. And once the dry eye issues improves to some extent, then repeat the keratometry. Again, repeat the keratometry on 2 different instruments. And also during the keratometry, what we could do is usually they say you should not be instilling any kind of drops before performing a keratometry because the values would be skewed. So making sure of that before the keratometry is performed.
Okay, and do you also take care of the integrated K readings if you have different K readings from different devices?
Yes. So what we do is that, as I said, because we have an image guided system, what we do is we take a K reading one from your normal optical biometer, be it your IOL master or your Lensa, etc. Compare it with the image guided system, because the principle on which they both run are different. And obviously you always have to compare the both of them. And if they both are not comparable, then you decide which system you are more trusting. A system which usually scans a central cornea would be something that you would you would tend to rely on more than the ones that have a paracentral corneal keratometry readings.
Thank you, Dr. Nikhil. Do we have further questions from Dr. Shilpa or Dr. Vevika, Ajay sir?
Yeah, excellent presentation, Nikhil.
Thank you, sir.
I would like to elaborate a little more on Barrett median K. That if we have 3 machines, okay, and this is for, okay, if you have 3 machines and K readings, the cylinder and the axis are absolutely matching, we can go by any one of them. And if they are slightly away from each other, then we can use Barrett median K. And
Yes,
if they are totally helter-skelter, probably because of the dry eye, as Dr. Swati said, I will fall back on manual keratometry, because all these keratometries are dynamic keratometries, what we mentioned up till now. And manual keratometry is a static keratometry. So it is not dependent that much on the dry eye. So I would fall back on that.
Thank you, sir, for the tip. And Dr. Ajay, Dr. Bhumik, would you like to share something?
I still, as Dr. Vivekar said, I still go with all the three, have all the three, and most of the time I'm doing on the manual itself, because my manual guy who is doing it for last 15 years, I got it spot on for 90. It's only in those there are wide difference. Maybe I just, if it is too much of a difference, I just forgo that case. I tell the patient that don't go in for a toric if it is too much. Maybe I'm missing out irregular astigmatism or something. So, but yes, manual is the last resort.
Dr. Swati, can we go to the next speaker, please? Because time is up.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Shilpa, are you ready with your presentation?
Yeah.
Please share.
The problem is I'm not able to see my screen.
I think.
What is happening, ma'am? When you click on the share screen, what is happening exactly?
I'm not able to see my screen at all.
So what do you see on the screen now?
I'm able to see Swati's screen, and I can see an iPhone, iPad, whatever.
Okay, let's do one thing. Once again, click on share screen and click on share option at the bottom. Yeah, now we can see your screen, your desktop. Now open the PPT.
Yeah.
Yeah, now can you make it full screen?
All right.
And you're good to go.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Swati. And Nikhil, that was a wonderful presentation. Now, having seen about how toric IOLs are so very good for us to go as far as toricity is concerned, there are some other methodologies that we can use in case of patients who cannot afford toric IOLs, or in cases where you feel that the astigmatism is less and you can deal with other methods. So an astigmatic eye, as we know, the cornea is steep on one axis and is flatter on the other. Astigmatism is a common refractive error which is present in as much as 13% of all refractive errors, and we know that there is a shift from with the rule to against the rule with age. Now, pre-existing astigmatism in cataract patients, as we know, is quite a number, which is about 47.4% being up to 0.75. We have 43.8% in the range of 0.75 to 2, and about 10% being more than 2 diopters. So in all, we can see there are almost about 80 to 90% of patients who have pre-existing astigmatism. So the need to correct this is it just goes without saying. So these are the various techniques that we can have. Now, OCCIs, that is opposite clear corneal incision, the basis of it is that it causes a flattening in that particular axis, which is the steeper axis, and an additional clear corneal incision in the opposite direction will enhance the flattening. This is the concept of doing an OCCI. Now, in my practice, I have seen that up to 1 diopter of flattening can be easily achieved by doing an OCCI. And for astigmatism, which is more than 1 diopter, I would go for a limbal relaxing incision. Now, this is a procedure which corrects up to 1 to 2 to 2.5 diopters of astigmatism. I would not go for LRI for anything more than 2 to 2.5. This procedure causes less glare and discomfort as compared to astigmatic keratotomies. the incision heals faster and the optical quality of the cornea is preserved. And the procedure is safer and very easy to incorporate in our routine cataract surgeries. The principles of LRI are that the cornea flattens over any incision and becomes steeper 90 degrees from the site of the incision. Now, as you can see here, this is the normal cornea, which is K1 and K2 are the same. That means there is no astigmatism. And against the rule wherein the horizontal K is greater than the vertical one. So paired LRIs are usually the norm, unless sometimes if it's very small astigmatism, you can just do your phaco incision on the steep axis up to about 0.5 to 0.75 can be corrected. But of course, you need to do know your surgically induced astigmatism for that. So this is the principle of the LRI, wherein you place your incisions on the steeper axis, and knowing that the opposite axis will have a steepening effect. Now there are different nomograms. Very commonly used nomogram is the simpler one is the Gills nomogram, and the other one is the Neeschamin, which is also called NAPA, that is age and Pachy adjusted one, wherein you have the with the rule and with the against the rule. So if you know where your steep axis is and you know the age of the patient, you can place your incisions in that axis and you know what is the arc length of the incisions that you're going to do. Now here, the important thing is that your blade depth has to be about 90% of the thinnest pachymetry. You have now the LRI calculator online, just like you have the Barrett calculator and everything. This is on the AMO platform, the Johnson & Johnson one. You feed in the data of your patient where the steep and flat K are put in, the axis is there, and also the thinnest corneal depth, that is the pachymetry. And surgically induced astigmatism also is fed in, and then you get a result like this, where you know where your phaco incision is, whether you're sitting temporal or at the superior end, and you can also see how many degrees are you going to have of your arc length, depending upon the extent of astigmatism. Now, these are the instruments that are being used. This is the blade, which is a pre-adjusted blade, which is about 600 microns. You have the Mendes ring, and you also have this marker for the 3, 6, and 9 o'clock positions. And this marker, the last one, which is for marking your actual axis if it is going to be in an oblique direction. Now this is a small video. The markings are done where you can see here, it's an arc length of about 50 degrees. You make sure that the cornea is absolutely dry for this, and the blade has to be perpendicular to the cornea so that you have a uniform depth when you make your incision. And the incision that you make has to be a little within the corneal limbal blood vessels. It should not be on the blood vessels. A similar incision is then placed on the opposite side. Again, the marking has already been done. Just about 0.5 millimeters within the corneal limbus is what is ideal. Of course, sometimes you may have patients where the corneal vasculature, the limbal vasculature may be extending more than that. And in that case, if you go for the LRI, you may have more of the healing that occurs later, and the astigmatic correction may reduce over a period of time. So this is very important that you avoid the vasculature. Now, points to remember as far as LRIs are concerned are you have to obtain a corneal topography pre-operatively. You have to take care of if any patient has any irregular cornea or a form fresh keratoconus or a pellucid marginal degeneration. It is better to avoid LRIs. You need to mark the cornea well. An upright position, of course, as we all know about the in supine position, it is not advisable. You plan to treat the corneal astigmatism and not the lenticular astigmatism. It's purely the corneal astigmatism. And like Nikhil said, it's very important that you don't put any drops or anything when you are doing the axial length and the keratometry when you are doing your A scans. And of course, use of an appropriate nomogram. The LRI calculator is something that is very useful today. Earlier, we used to have the chart of the Napa nomogram in our OTs and trying to see how many arc degrees and all that. Choosing a good marking system, choosing a good blade, 600 micron standard depth is advisable, 90% of the depth of the thinnest cornea. And you have to make sure that the handle of the blade is absolutely perpendicular to your cornea. So you get a uniform depth throughout the arc. The incision, like I said, should be just within the avascular cornea. You could decide whether you want to do it before or after. There are two schools of thought here. I prefer to do it after my phaco is done, because sometimes there are chances of it going through and then you could have a problem of a wound leak and things like that. So I would rather do it later. And under corrections always are better than over corrections, because if you have an under correction, you can go ahead and tackle that later on, but an over correction can be a little problematic. So cornea should be absolutely dry. Always make the eyeball very tense with viscoelastic so you get a uniform cut. And viscoelastic is also facilitates a smooth incision. Now, if you compare the LRIs with the AKs, they are a little more difficult to do. They are slightly within the corneas, and that is why some of these incisions, they do not heal for a very long period of time. There are more colored halos and glare with AKs as compared to LRIs, and LRIs are definitely more easy to use. The comparison of LRI and toric IOLs, well, yes, toric IOLs do take upper edge, but in patients where the patients cannot afford it, then this could be an option. So the take-home message is up to 1 diopters OCCI, 1 to 2 diopters or 2.5 LRIs, and anything more than 2.5 go for toric IOLs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shilpa. That was a very beautiful presentation. And I would like to share that even for Panoptix, which I did recently, I had a 0.75 SIL, and the patient did not want to go for Panoptix torics, but it came out, I did an LRI and it came out absolutely spot on, a plain thing. So Dr. Shilpa, I guess you're mute.
No.
Okay, fine. So what has been your experience like all over these years?
Well, very honestly, I used to do a lot of LRIs earlier. Nowadays, of course, I avoid them. In patients who are really not able to afford, I would rather tackle the toricity with a toric IOL, with an Indian IOL or something. Another experience that I had, one of the reasons why I have reduced doing LRIs nowadays, unless it's absolutely necessary, is that patients do complain of irritation and pricking sensation for quite a period of time, especially if your arc lengths are little longer. So I am not doing it for anything more than 1 diopter nowadays.
Okay, and how long is the precaution? Like,
You need to give lubricants for at least a period of 6 weeks to 8 weeks. But the initial, what I had seen was when the arc length is more, that means when you are dealing with more astigmatism, the patients do complain of irritation. That is, they can see well, but they are very upset because of the irritation that they face. So
Okay.
smaller arc lengths are better. This has
Okay.
been my experience.
Okay. And do we have insights from Dr. Vavikar, Dr. Arup, Dr. Rajipal, sir?
I agree with her totally that nowadays LRI are restricted only for astigmatism between 0.7 and 1. Beyond that, we go for toric, or if the patient is affording it, just give it up. Let the astigmatism be as it is.
Thank you, Dr. Swati. The time is up. We are running 6 minutes late. So can we go ahead, please?
Okay, fine. So the next talk is mine. I'll just share it. I guess I'm visible.
Yes, it's visible.
I think we can take question at the end of our session because probably we are running late.
Sure.
Last
we'll do that.
speaker, yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So Dr. Arup, sir, I'll start my presentation and then is yours?
Yeah. You start
Okay.
your presentation.
Okay, thank you. So preoperative and intraoperative toric markings. So for any toric IL to give results with accuracy and precision, the marking should be spot on. So reference marking methods could be slit lamp, bubble marking, freehand like smartphone assisted, digital marking, femtolaser assisted, and intraoperative aberrometry. So this is how the slit lamp marking is done. As we can see in the video, the patient is sitting upright and focusing on a fixed point straight, and a coaxial thin slit is turned to 0, 180 degree, and on a dry cornea, it can be marked with a 26 gauge needle or a pen. So this is the way how the bubble marking is done. On the OT table, the patient can be seated straight, and the patient should be looking straight, and after a speculum, after giving a Paracane, the bubble should be in the center. So the technique definitely does matter sometimes, and gently place the marks. This is how the freehand marking is done. On a dry cornea, after putting the speculum, we need to hold the torchlight straight and the patient is looking straight. But the tip should be always marked once. It should not be smudging, and it should be straight on a dry cornea. So confirmation of the reference axis can be done with smartphone apps, and these are available online. It could be on the Google Play Store or the App Store. The Barrett's marker is available. Now this is, I'll show you how to do the smartphone marking. Everyone cannot afford the digital marking, and the smartphone marking is equally accurate. So this is a gyroscopic assisted app, and as we turn the camera, it rotates the axis marking, and the cross alignment of the circle is done, and then keeping the mobile rotation at 0 degree, align the corner reflex at the center, and take the photograph and manually adjust the cornea with the outer circle of the app digital marker reference. And after that, we need to just press on the protractor sign given here. And then after clicking on this, we get a red line. And that red line, we need to drag through the mark and through the center of the circle. And then we get the misalignment on the top like this. So ink marking in the theater can be done like, we need to just on a dry cornea, we need to align like over here, it was 170 degree, the 90 degree can be marked, and then again the axis of placement of the IOL can be marked. But then the problem with all these is the marks can bleed, there can be double marking with slight shaking. Again, for a good surgical flow, all the image guided system has become very common, and the image guided system, as we can see, consists of 3 units: the Varian measurement unit, it can be Varian, Callisto, and many other. Like the Varian measurement unit with the near infrared LED lights measures the spheres and the cylinder power of the central 2.8 degree of the cornea, and uses multiple reference points on the conjunctiva, limbus, scleral vessels. And then this detailed thing is passed on to the vision planner and then into the Varian digital marker. Over here, now this creates a digital overlay, as we can see here. And this again coincides. In this patient, we had done a manual marking as well as a Varian. So it's just showing to be the same. And this is the in the OT when we are doing with the digital overlay. So the incision marks are shown at 90 degree if we are a superior surgeon, and then paracentesis marks, and also gives us the rhexis size and a rhexis reference. And then we just need to forget about the rest of the things, about the marks getting diluted and getting washed away. We just need to proceed with the surgery. So this is how the implantation is done. So at the time of implantation, we again can see that we just need to give the IOL, and the Varian shows us the axis of placement, and we need to just put our IOL, align our IOL along the axis of placement and wash behind the IOL, and the chamber should not be tight, and the Purkinje images should overlap. So digital reference marking delivers better outcomes than slit lamp assisted and conventional manual ink marking techniques in terms of astigmatism. But as far as the smartphone assisted is concerned, we found very good results and equally comparable results in the study done at our center. And femtosecond laser assisted marking can also be done. It could be the corneal marks with the femtosecond laser or the capsulotomy marks, but the capsulotomy marks are more reproducible, sharper, radially closer to the IOL marks. And there's a small tilt effect or parallax error, and the capsulotomy marks are much more precise in that way. Intraoperative wavefront aberrometry can be used. Again, it's a real-time measurement of the measures. A phakic and pseudo-phakic refraction helps to measure and choose the IOL power and the adjustment of rotation as needed. But again, the results can be skewed with surface changes, OVD choice, the maintenance of the IOP, and the speculum pressure, wound hydration. And again, finally, it just guesstimates the effective lens position. So I would like to conclude by saying that the future is here, but are we ready for it? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shati. It's an excellent overview. But many of ophthalmologists using still manual marking. So
Yes, sir.
yeah, can you highlight manual marking regarding something, and like to hear from Dr. Bhavekar. Bhavekar has a definite algorithm to validate the manual marking. I think Bhavekar also to present this validation, how to validate your manual marking. It's almost same platform we used to talk in 10, 12 years back. How to validate. Is Bhavekar is here?
Yeah.
Hello? Bhavekar? So,
Dr. Swati, are we taking the questions later? Or?
Yeah, I guess we'll take the questions later.
Okay.
So yeah, so we can proceed with it. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Arup Bhowmik from Disha Eye Hospital. He's a prolific surgeon and he can operate 50 cases in a day and all premium IOLs. And let's hear from him about post-operative assessment and realignment.
This is a almost simple post-operative assessment and realignment procedure. I just want to share. This is a post-operative surgical surprise or residual extubate. So what could be the option? It may be the wrong IOL, your biometry or your calculation is wrong, or there may be misalignment. Either misalignment, your axis marking is wrong, toric axis marking wrong, or there is a IOL rotation. These could be the possibilities. So if you see the workflow, it's a biometry and keratometry transfer, the toric calculation, IOL calculation, reference marking, axis marking, and the alignment, IOL alignment. These you have to in very busy practitioner or in a hospital, you have to depend on many person in this transfer. So it is very very much possible that there may be something wrong in this stage, and you have to take an IOL rotation, which can be happen, but this part actually is a your wrong IOL, and this part is a malalignment. This talk I will concentrate in the misalignment part mainly. So threshold, what would the threshold of the monofocal toric? If you see some kind of residual astigmatism, what is the threshold? This threshold actually varies from patient to patient and surgeon to surgeon. So, but for a multifocal toric, threshold is very less. It is only 0.5%, because if you see the multifocal IOL, there is astigmatism, the chronoid stem, and the only one factor for the diffusion and another for the factor for the diffusion, and it is actually create loss of. And there is a paper presented, study presented in 2010. Only 0.5 astigmatism reduce the restore +3 lens from 6/6 to 6/12 part. So this is possible in case of so we have to understand the validation and effectivity of toric IOL calculation also. So we should not jump into the every cases to be perfect and rotate every cases. So it means this is the most popular Barrett IOL calculation, and it has only 85% accuracy. So 0.2 is a benchmark, 0.3 is a benchmark, and that is a almost, if you that is a almost 20% of the toricity intent to correct. It has a only 85% accuracy in the Barrett toric calculator. But yes, definitely who are using Barrett TK Universal 2 or Barrett TK toric calculator, in the which is available only in the IOL Master 700, the toric accuracy is 92%. So there is a study, the misalignment, axis alignment of toric IOL and error at postoperative rotation. And every cases of 72 toric techniques IOL was in a study, and digital photograph taken in the after 1 hour, after 1 day, after 1 month, and after 1 month, and seen the most of the surgical alignment is wrong in the 28%, and there is a rotation of IOL in 61%. All cases which is rotated in postoperative period. So the most important time for the rotation of the IOL is basically in the first 1 hour. So if you have as Dr. Shati described, if you have a digital marking system, it can avoid the reference error in the reference marking and the axis marking part. But if you have a Callisto system and the biometry system, that directly transfer your data in the OT by LAN. So what are the rotational stability is depends on the perfect incision, relatively perfect size rexis, slightly smaller rexis, avoid anterior capsular polishing, complete OVD regular, avoid inflate AC at the end of the notch the IOL and the capsular back, ensure position once speculum is off. And rotation instability is a complete unfolding. If you complete your case before the unfolding case, this is the most common. An incomplete OVD removal and large capsular bag, large rexis, wound leak, overinflate of AC. This is a very important factor that can rotate the IOL within the after postoperative period. And I will design definitely all the IOL. I can IQ toric is a the different study. The IQ toric shows the most rotational stability. So how do if you have a refractive surface? So you have to identify the axis. You see the toric calculation. If you mark the actual axis, and if you collaborate in the residual astigmatism and the IOL axis from the mark of the actual axis where the lens should be. So if you can calculate and you can assume that it is okay, then you can decide whether you go for rotation or not. You can straight away go to mark again and go to OT and rotate the IL. And how do you calculate this? You can definitely go. I suggest everyone to go. This is a astigmatisfix.com. This is a wonderful website. This is a free website, and you can do the calculation with this. But how do you identify the axis? Note the horizontal axis in slit lamp, mark that, take a slit lamp photo in retro resolution, and adopt Photoshop, which is cost 7 version. It is cost only 1400 rupees. You can, where is your caliper, you can identify the axis and rotation of the IOL, actual IOL. You can identify IOL axis in the mobile app. Already Dr. Shati described. You have a slit lamp photo with the IOL mobile holding IOL photograph system in your. This is a cost almost 1,000 or 2,000. You can take a photograph and you can identify IOL axis. So now the refractive surprise identify your IOL axis actual marker, but not collaborating with the residual astigmatism. So what to do? You should check the biometry, repeat the keratometry, and repeat calculation, and fix what is the wrong in the. If it is a wrong IOL, even astigmatism fix.com gives you the what should be the best in that wrong and calculation. This is how it is looks like. You enter your physician name, last name, email address, patient info, and you can select IOL. Say you have to intend to correct 4 diopter of cylinder in the corneal plane, but you only put the calculation only 2.74 correction. So which these software give you the what could be the best with this lens. So you can put this lens and all the kind of, you can put the other lens also. Thus you can put the Indian lens and how to similar in the corneal plane, axis of IOL axis, and what diopter of lens is given, and it will calculate beautifully what to do in this. Then this is a absolutely good software. Everybody can free and everybody can use. And iTrace also has a Zaldívar toric caliper, but it has a problem. It never allowed to input what lens and what diopter intended to correct in the corneal plane. So you should match your corneal astigmatism, which calculated in the iTrace system, and it is matching with the biometry system. Otherwise, rotation would be the overestimated or underestimated. So our IOL alignment, ideal time is alignment study shows after 3 weeks, because there is a little bit of fibrosis in the capsular bag. But role of CTR definitely prevent or reduce IOL rotation. No, but it is not routinely recommended. But it is, you can use the it's myopic cases where the axial length is more than 25.5 or 26. And some surgeons prefer to implant routinely in multifocal toric. And the most of the surgeons prefer it because you have a very narrow landing zone in a multifocal toric. So this is one of the best, the Henderson type of, but this is unfortunately not available here. These give excellent rotational stability of the IOL. Contraindication of the CTR, late interference and fibrosis expected. So it is very, venture is sometimes very dangerous. You can rupture the capsule. So IOL rotation can be clockwise, anti-clockwise. This is the only lens I saw in the anti-clockwise rotation. This is basically technistoric. So you have to wait for the complete unfolding of the lens. Alignment, early alignment. Most of the Indian scenario have to intervene early because it's very difficult to explain patient regarding this. So we generally do the next week or the 10 to 14 days. It is advisable, do not inflate the capsular bag OVD if you are re-rotation within the 14 days. And you just inflate the anterior chamber, the viscoelastic, and rotate the back. But be careful. But if there is any traction, you should inflate it. A late rotation 3-4 weeks, and this is a case. I'm just finishing 2 cases. This is the same days I implanted wrong in 2 cases. This is a Zeiss toric plate haptic design, and I rotated without inflate the capsular bag, just putting the viscoelastic into the anterior chamber. And this is the case. I do the same thing. Sorry, this is a see after rotation there is a fold. So I planning to do a CTR in this case. So one should be very careful when you rotate the lens. If there is any resistance, inflate the bag. Otherwise, if you don't find any resistance, don't inflate the bag, then it will be more stable in the postoperative. Thank you so much for.
Thank you, sir. That was a very nice presentation and a very detailed presentation. So I'm sure you have a session in the other session. You have a talk.
I'll join within 10 minutes. I want to listen, Dr. Bhavekar. Bhavekar, you have a presentation how to validate the manual marking. I remember it is almost 12 years back. How to you forgot probably. You have now all your digital system, you know. So kindly you can little bit time spent for our viewer, but still don't have the digital system that they are doing the manual marking system. You have a fantastic algorithm in that. I remember.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you can.
So our next presenter is the Dr. Ajay Paul. Any introduction is less for him. So I'll let him proceed with no introduction, but he is one of the gurus of ophthalmology for Kolkata and Bengal. There are many people who have grown under him. Let's hear from him.
Thank you, Swati, for that. Am I visible and audible? Hello?
Yes, you are visible.
Okay, thank you. So I'll be just, as you have asked me, the toric, toric IOLs push your limits, the difficult and challenging. These are surgical difficulties. I'm not saying on the marking or etc. Arup has already shown you. So what about these different cases? Now, this is a toric in small pupil. Now, most of the time, small pupil, I would not like to put any dilating device because the post-operative, when if you leave it a bit dilated, more than 3 millimeter, a lot of glare and all, you lose your toricity and then patient starts complaining a lot. So this is one of the case where it was almost 3.54 millimeter. I did the Rexis just going behind the iris and just put in, this is one of the T3 lenses of Alcon Acrisoft IQ and see, and then just to see the position, you just have to move with your force with one of those instruments. And this is a small people had to put a hook because this is earlier days, this is almost 10 or 12 years back. See, I'm putting a doing dilatation with my viscodilatation after stretching. This is around 4 millimeter Rexis, and here I come and I see I'm losing the Rexis, and I had no other way of putting the iris hooks there. I have just inflated it too much to the periphery there and going and doing the completing the Rexis here, and I've got my mark or preoperative marking already present there. So I complete my emulsification, and while I'm completing my emulsification, I'm trying to release those hooks a little bit less so that I want only the central part to work with. See, I made it smaller and I'm putting the lens there, and there the lens goes in. And I can see the position. I can just move it with my tubular hook and see where the lens position is okay or not along the way. And as I said, that you can also rotate it anti-clockwise also. And at the end of the surgery, I just get it done. And while removing the hook, what I do is put visco. I remove the visco from behind the lens and then put the visco while removing the hooks. Now, this is one more case, a small pupil where we decided to put a Malign ring, and the toric lens had to go there. So this is someone was toric is a case of IFIS. I knew that patient was on anti-prostate drugs. So here I get a Rexis around 5 millimeter and end up with procedure. I put this lens. This was a multifocal toric, as you can see. The lens goes in, and there I position it, and I remove the viscoelastic from behind the lens because I don't want to lose. I see the position there. It is, the position is okay. I tap it And then once this is done, put viscoelastic over the lens now and remove that malignant ring. And I know it can be removed easily. As you can see, I just tuck it and bring it out. And then do the bimanual IA and do a little bit of tapping of the pupillary margin so that the pupil comes down. So I don't want any glare, postoperative glare or halos in these patients. Now this is another patient where on the table, I didn't notice this before, this patient was needing T6 as far as I remember. So, and as I start the surgery, somewhere there, I can see the bag is not stable there, it's coming out. So I put a CTR there. So if I had any eye trace and all, I could have actually seen the lenticular astigmatism that was there. But luckily for me, the tilt was very little. So at the end of the surgery, once you put the CTR and stabilized it, probably some of the toricity that we saw was the patient actually needed around 0.75 cylinder. He was 2.25, needed 0.75 cylinder post-op. But then that was probably of the lenticular astigmatism that was at that time. I didn't have any way of knowing whether it was lenticular or not, which was 10 years back. So the lens was put, as you can see, CTR, you can put it if there is a tilt there, but otherwise also people are putting CTR for high myopes, as I said, or toric multifocal. Now this is a case where I taken for toric and it ended up TCL. Let's see that as I'm going ahead with the surgery, somewhere there, as I'm trying to take the last pieces and some of the epinucleus, I think end of the surgery, I realized as I was doing bimanual IA, there is the tear there. Luckily for me, the tear was just superiorly, I mean, where I was sitting, that's on the other side, and I was sitting anyway temporarily. So there it is. You can see, I could see the visco going in there. So that means there was no viscous vitreous there. So all I had to do was high molecular viscoelastic. In this case, it was visco. I have no financial interest, but definitely it has a very good way of plugging that tear, and the lens goes in there gradually. Now, you know, the axis of this toric lenses or the IQ lenses is very slow to open up. You can just get in, tap it in the axis that is there. I know there was this, the viscoelastic is there below. So I just, and then gradually, you know, use your bimanual to remove the whatever little bit of cortex was there and tap it and take out the viscoelastic as much as possible. Patient was on post-op IOP reducing agents, but the patient did well and there was no rotation then over a period of follow-up that we had. Now this was a case, the last case that I was showing. This is a case of 8-year-old child came with sort of PPC with a high cylinder almost. And patient needed almost T8 as I remember. So this child we did there. So we thought we went ahead as we would do any PPC, but later on because I found that it was probably a posterior lenticulus that was there. Once we do a not hydrodissection, the visco dissection we are doing, just visco dissection clearing, and just by bimanual IA we could remove the soft, the cortex that was there, and there you can see the stalk of the posterior polar opacity that came out, and then we realized that this was actually a posterior lenticulus, and there was a opacity there. So we went ahead and did a posterior capsulorhexis. As you can see, you just do a posterior capsulorhexis in that area. There's a fibrous plate, and then once you removed it, we put in the lens there, and the lens settled in quite well, easily there, and tag it, rotate it, and put it at the axis, the marked axis that was there. The child, this was again done almost 6 years back, and the gentleman see the lens is again tucked in. There it is, and the child is still under follow-up now. It's become a teenager now, and there you have it. So these are some of the challenging situations in toric that I had over the years. Thank you. Thank you for having me here, Pati. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, that was very enlightening, and it does give us the hope that even if we face with some challenge, we can definitely one day go ahead with it. But I'd like to just ask you one thing. What if the Rexis size is too big, or if there is a Rexis extension, then how do you proceed in such cases?
Rexis extension, I would not put a toric. That's for sure. I mean, I know the torics won't, I mean, it would rotate definitely. But, irregular, I mean, the size of the Rexis is small, up to 3.54 millimeter. 4 millimeter is easily you can put the Rexis. But if it is too big, again, you might lose the spherical power. The lens might move forward, come out of the bag, and so those problems are there. But ideally, as you said, you need to get a very ideal Rexis in those. But if there is a Rexis extension beyond it, I would definitely, I mean, if it is too much to T79, maybe I'll go ahead with it. But then for early astigmatism,
so, will the direction of placement or the direction of alignment also matter? Like if the haptics are in opposite direction of the extension?
Yeah, in that case, probably if it is there, but most of the time, if the Rexis, if it is a little bit extension, I think almost all of us will do it. And if it is away from the extension, that's fine. But if it is too much, definitely I would abandon it.
Okay, thank you, sir. And I'm sure for all these, you never have any Rexis extensions or big Rexis. You're absolutely spot on with femto, without femto, though most of the cases you're doing is on femto now. So definitely with that, we come to our next talk by Dr. Chandrasekhar Wavekar and the future, the flax with toric. And he is a toric guru for the entire country. I guess, sir, please enlighten us.
Thank you, Dr. Swati, for those kind words. I hope you can see and hear me.
Yes, sir. We can.
Yes, sir. Very well.
So very nice talks up till now. Everybody contributed really well. And now we are going to talk about future of the astigmatism management, that is with femtosecond laser assisted cataract surgery. So flax or femtosecond laser assisted cataract surgery has got many areas in which we can manage the astigmatism. So let us start with incision. Number one is that we have got a complete control over the cyclotorsion, and therefore there is a degree-wise accuracy in the placement of the incision. Then placement with respect to limbus. Once upon a time, there was a doubt whether we can put them at the limbus above the, beyond the limbus, just inside the limbus. But now we are bang on sure, and the arcus senalis, which used to be a problem, is no more a problem. And therefore, we are going to place it exactly just inside the limbus, and that also ensures total very good control over the SI. Consistency of the configuration. Whenever we are taking an incision with a metallic blade, slight movement, even while withdrawing the blade on the right or left hand side, changes the configuration of the incision, and sometimes it can be costly. Remember, our centroid SI is 0.1, but many times, this is an average, many times the astigmatic SI can be as high as 0.75. But with flax, the chances of that are very less, and therefore you are very unlikely to get surprises. Reverse trapezoid. Now, when we are in the incision main port, the maximum side-to-side movement of the phaco needle is at the inner lip. With manual incision, it is not possible to take reverse trapezoid. That means the inner lip is bigger than the outer lip. You can take a trapezoid where the outer lip is bigger than the inner lip, but it does not serve our purpose. Only with flax you can take a reverse trapezoid incision where the inner lip is bigger, and therefore the distortion is less, and therefore the SI does not go awry, especially if you are tackling a hard cut. Then the second point about flax is CCC. Because the CCC is exactly centric and very, very circular, there is it is ensured that the placement of the lens is accurate, not in the short term, but also in the long term, in case the fibrosis takes place. Therefore, any astigmatism induced by shifting or the tilting of the lens is avoided. Then we go to LRI, fantastic lectures on LRI by Dr. Shilpa especially. Placement of arc as per the diameter. Okay, so we are independent of the corneal diameter. It will not have any impact on the amount of astigmatism induced by the LRI, but it still makes a lot of difference because smaller the chord length, less will be the irritation. Degree-wise precision. Now we are using cylinder, we are incorporating posterior corneal astigmatism. So our cylinder is not in the steps of 0.25, but in the steps of 0.1. And therefore your LRI can be 48 degrees to 73 degrees. Such a placement exactly from 40 to 73 is possible on a flax only. It is not possible with LRI, especially along with cyclotorsion. Then I am placing it on the 8 millimeter diameter, which is too far away from the pupil to create any, dysphotopsia. But at the same time, it is not so big that it will cause foreign body sensation or dryness. The pachymetry is OCT based. On every point where the LRI is going, you are getting a pachymetry, and therefore your depth is precise, which is why you are getting a very good effect of the LRI in flax. Then end-to-end uniform depth. Whenever we are taking manual LRI, the starting and the end of the LRI, the depth used to be shallow, and because of that, sometimes it used to undercorrect. So many new knives have come, LRI knives, where the configuration of the knife is a rectangle to ensure the proper depth right from the beginning till the end. But with LRI, this is a child's play. Flax, this is a child's play. So LRI cuts before corneal or epithelial edema sets in. The reason why we do LRI at the end of cataract, not at the end of this cataract surgery, but at the beginning, is because by the end, corneal epithelial edema is there, cornea is swollen, and you will get superficial LRI. Over in flax, we are doing it even before taking a first incision. So the cornea is clear with, or epithelium is clear without any edema. So more accuracy. Because of that, of course, there is less chances of perforation, and perforation means in that particular case, astigmatic control is gone. Less chances of off-center placement. Now, many times when we do manually, the LRI can be off-center. And second thing is that, rather than an arc, it is, it is multiple small line segments. Okay, if a surgeon is not very comfortable. In this case, you get a perfect arc at all times, which is concentric to the corneal diameter. And it is very easy to open up. There are some people who keep it intrastromal, and at the end of 1 month, if there is a residual astigmatism, they can open it up on the slit lamp. That's very easy. Now let us take two examples. Number one is we implanted a toric EROV lens, 68-year-old male patient with a standard cataract and a cylinder of 2.14. So this is the calculation, 2.14 at 179, and this was the plan where the placement would be at 1 degree and the incision would be at 150 degrees. This is the image before the docking. Now we have docked it. Now registration is complete. Just look at this cyclotorsion clockwise 2 degrees. So it measures cyclotorsion and ensures placement right on the right, exactly where you want. Then you go to the shifting of the incisions. You can see that the side port is being shifted precisely. Then the main incision. Now, I'm sorry for that. Okay, see the way capsulotomy is happening, the nucleotomy is happening. The CCC is absolutely centric. Similarly, this box configuration tells us the same thing. And then we go to the surgery. Very quick. You see how easy it is to open the incision now. Okay, it takes one stroke, and this is the VVT lens, VVT toric. I'm going under the IOL and proper placement. Under the IOL for removal of the visco. Patient was 66N6 on day 2. Then there is another patient where we had to do LRI. 59-year-old male with a standard cataract with a cylinder of 0.7, as we discussed. That now we are doing astigmatism LRI only for cylinders between 0.7 to 1 or 0.65 to 1. And this was the plan of action. This is the femto LRI details. 25 degrees of arcs centered at 24 degree, and astigmatism effect of 0.94 where the cylinder is 0.92, and 8 millimeter arcs with 85% depth. And this is the plan of action. You can see that these two LRI are there. And now we go to this is the pre-doc image, post-doc image. I will skip the registration. Now straight away go to okay, this is proper arrangement of the incisions. Now you can see on this OCT, I'm adjusting the anterior and posterior corneal mark, so that I get proper LRI, and then start. Now you can see this configuration. These two tells us that CCC is bang in the center. Now over here you will get an LRI here and here as we had planned. That's it. And one more short video to show that opening of the LRI is very easy. Okay, just have to dip the femto spatula and move it to and fro, and that's it. Then this is the trifocal lens. Sorry. So post-op day 1 patient was 6'9" and N6. Thank you very much. Where is the thank you slide? Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That was a very nice presentation, and we are honored to hear from you and share the podium. Dr. Ajay, do you have questions regarding this? Because you are yourself doing a lot of femtos with LRIs.
This is a different platform that we do. We do in our Catalyst. But what I wanted to ask first, are you incorporating that through the variant or the marks, or it is you're manually fitting it? And are you following any particular protocol on that?
Yes, very good questions. See, we are using Varian right now, but sometimes the Varian registration fails, and then we go manually. Okay, point number 1. Point number 2, all the online calculators, LRI calculators, they do not incorporate posterior cornea. Okay, and that is why sometimes we can go wrong. So we have Wavekar Saurabh calculator. Perhaps this is the only calculator which incorporates posterior corneal astigmatism, and I'm using that. I'm fairly happy, and like almost like more than 90% of the cases, the residual is practically 0.
So do you change the position of the, how far it is from the limbus, the LRI, the art that you are doing? Are you following it in a routine, or you're changing it according to the astigmatic profile?
If it is manual LRI, I'm 0.5 millimeter inside the limbus. If it is flax LRI, I'm doing it on 8 millimeter arc.
Yeah, 8 millimeter. But do you change that arc at any if a higher?
No, I don't change. See, basically, I do not do astigmatism control with LRI if the astigmatism is more than 1.
More than 1. So up to 1 you are. So basically, you have replaced the manual LRI with femto LRI, whatever you are doing.
Yes. See, what happens more than 1, as I think Dr. Swati said, that there is a foreign body sensation, or you said, LRI size is big.
Dr. Shilpa has said.
Yeah, Dr. Shilpa.
Yeah, Dr. Shilpa said. And second thing is that, LRIs have a tendency to, for the astigmatism to come back after a few years. Now, what I've seen is that effect is much less if the astigmatism is treated is up to 1 diopter. When you are treating, say, something like 2.25, after 4 years, you will see out of that 1 diopter has come back. and it is exactly at the same meridian where was your post-op pre-op cylinder. So it is relapse only, recurring. The effect of LRI is waning away. When you are doing 0.75 to 1 diopter, that is less. Second thing is that because the size of the arc is less, foreign body sensation and dry eye problem is less. So that's why better to take it slightly inside at 8 millimeter. And if you take it too inside, patient will get glare and all problems. 8 millimeters is like quite far away from the pupil.
But then we have been doing also with, but I have been, a little bit easy with, I would do up to 1.25 and have done with 1.5 also. And it's been almost 3 years now. I found that it has stayed on. Unlike the LRIs, that was the limbal which is to do earlier, but it has stayed on almost 80% of patients. That was.
No, precisely. I absolutely agree with you. See, with femto, there is no study, but whatever we are observing that the relapse rate is much less. That is one thing. Second thing is that, you observe your cases over 4 to 5 years. There are some patients like, who are doing quite okay for 3 years. And after 4 years, there is a relapse. 5 years, there is some astigmatism comebacks. And we have tried to understand whether it is age-related change. No, it is not age-related. It is just, recurrence of the same astigmatism. So it is happening sometimes. But I guess up to 1.25, 1.5 is also okay. Beyond that, it is really...
Beyond that is not definitely, especially if we're putting a multifocal, and then if it is up to 1.25, as just now Swati had said, I have been doing it. I mean, I am very wary of putting this multifocal torics because I've not been very happy with them. Because I know various reasons, even
it's very, very rewarding, multifocal toric. And if you are comfortable with monofocal torics, please go ahead. Actually, Arup took a very good lecture that, it was, right. But he's not there, I guess.
No, he will be joining us very soon. And anything about the manual marker, I think we could hear for you. How does, because 70%, 80% or even 90% of surgeons don't have access to all these varion, etc. So how do they stabilize their varion marker?
See, manual marking, the simple thing is that what people are trying to do, that they're going to, show a slit at 90 degrees and then mark. Okay, that is first error. Error number 2 is which point we take. So for that, very simple. First thing is that, suppose like because of you dried the cornea, but even then you got a very broad mark. Okay, you take that point where the mark is intersecting the limbus, okay, and midpoint of the mark. So that point becomes uniform for everybody. Suppose your mark is like say 3 millimeter wide. Let's take an example. So 1.5 millimeter from the either side. It is exactly in the center, and where it is crossing the limbus. Take that point, okay, and try to join it with the corneal apex. Now this is the axis of that mark. So sometimes the mark may not be, suppose this is the limb, the mark may not be like this, the mark may be like this or like this, slightly tilted, but that point remains always same because that point is the fulcrum of that your mark. So if we take that point and the corneal axis apex is a very thin slit joining the 2 points, that is the axis of the mark. Now what I do is that I mark first and then measure where the mark is. So rather than keeping slit at 90 and trying to mark there and the patient moves you are slightly this way, that way, forget it. Don't keep a slit. Just mark it where you think is 6 o'clock, okay? And then that make a thin slit passing to that point where they described and the corneal apex, and then see the axis of that slit. That is the axis of the mark. So if we go this way, we do not make any mistake. And then, so previously I went from 2 marks to 3 marks because I was not sure, later on, because of this method, when I became really confident about what I'm doing, I have now come back to 2 marks. So 1 mark is here and 1 mark is, horizontally. Now, after that, what I did is that 1 mark is here and 1 mark, I try to mark it where I want to place the lens. Okay. I will measure it, of course. that it is I wanted the lens at say 45, but the mark is at 48. But I know it is, I'm very close to that. So if we measure this way, we are very much accurate about the placement of the lens.
Dr. Vavekar, in your experience, how much degree of off, like now, like you said, if it's 45 and it's 48, how much degrees is acceptable?
Yeah, it is a very very difficult question to answer, but I'll tell you that anything more than 5 degrees becomes tough. Okay, we were doing once upon a very long time back, we used to do study between about the stability of the toric IOL Alcon study we were doing, and sometimes we found that they were 5 degrees off. Okay, but still the patient was, without much astigmatism. So how it used to happen, we don't know. Probably, few errors they added together and we got a good result. And sometimes, only one error is there, but it will give you a residual cylinder. So, but I guess that conoid of Strum and everything, they get adjusted.
Yeah.
But when the difference is more than 5 degrees, it is very difficult for the patient to adjust. The quality of vision is going to be quite poor. And that is why that Dr. Arup's lecture was very important, that once you start placing your lens bang on target and you're getting the residual bang on target, that is the time we shift to multifocal toric, not as a starting point.
And just as we were talking about LRIs, and with age, the LRIs like reducing, the astigmatism coming back. What about toric IOLs? And with age, the cornea becoming more against the rule. Then what happens?
Yeah, so we are here coming about, whether to overcorrect or undercorrect. Okay. Now we must remember that between 45 to 85, okay, the ATR increases by 1 diopter. Okay, and that is also not in all patients. It's around 25-30% of the patients only. Okay, now so therefore, if you undercorrect WTR till the age of say 65 by around 0.25, 0.5, if at all the patient develops an ATR, it will get nullified. But if you are treating ATR, okay, then it is better to be bang on target or slightly overcorrect. Now, another point is that now let us say that you have a lens, any lens you have to place at 180 degrees, okay, with say T4, the residual is 0.20, and with T5, the residual is again 0.25, but axis flipped. So it is overcorrecting. Now, if it is WTR, okay, I would undercorrect. If it is ATR, I would go for higher length. You understand what I'm talking?
Yes. Yes.
That is how I will do. Then second thing is that if it is a slight overcorrection, then I would like to overcorrect, because suppose you are off the axis by 1 or 2 degrees, the power of the toric lens decreases slightly, okay, and therefore you will be bang on target. You are already overcorrected. If you have placed it bang at 90 degrees, supposed to be, and you are overcorrecting say by 0.12 diopter. If you are 2 degrees off the axis, you will be overcorrecting by say 0.01 diopter or something. But if the patient is having say 0.25 diopters under correction, and then you are slightly off the target, then 0.27 will become 0.37, and patient will require a 5 cylinder. So if we go into fine tuning, you will be able to understand which cases to overcorrect and which cases to undercorrect.
Okay, I think we come to the end of the session. Dr. Shilpa, do we have any further questions?
I think we have 2 minutes more. So in case,
Okay.
and
So can I ask a
congratulations
question?
to all the speakers for having given such wonderful presentations and also finishing on time. I think AIOS would actually be very happy about that.
Yes, it is our duty to finish in time for the last speaker of the day, you know.
Yes.
Okay. Can we take a photograph together?
Yes, please.
Nikhil, I think you wanted to ask a question.
Yes, Nikhil. Yes.
So two things. One, so do we open up all your LRIs or like intraoperatively only, or do you then wait for to see the result and then take a call on the slit lamp? That was one. And second, regarding the axis flip, is that to be taken into consideration in all the cases? Like, does axis flip really cause post-op variation when it comes to quality of vision? Because patients don't accept it in the on the opposite cylinder or opposite axis.
Yeah. So question number one is that previously I used to leave some LRI unopened, but as the time went, I became very confident about the amount of astigmatism I'm treating and the effect of LRI. So nowadays I open everything on table. Okay. And you know, 5 degrees under correction of 5 degrees, 0.5, sorry, not 0.5. See, 0.1 diopter under correction or 0.1 diopter over correction, that means axis flipped or not flipped. I do not think that it makes any difference. So we look at all the other points what I described, you know, and then we decide whether to overcorrect or undercorrect.
Thank you.
I think we can take a quick pic.
Yeah, please.
Yes, yes. So everyone can smile.
And you're going to post it on WhatsApp?
Yes, sir. Please smile, everyone. Thank you. That's done.
Thank you.
Very nice conducting. Huh?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It's an honor to share the podium with stalwarts like you, Dr. Ajay Paul, Dr. Arup, Dr. Shilpa, Dr. Nikhil. And I guess that would be it. And we wind up the session.
Thank you, Dr. Swadhi, for making this in
you.
time. This is absolutely amazing. And all speakers, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was well deserved. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
you know, help.
So the next session, the next session in Brill Hall,
Yeah.
the next session in Brill Hall is at 11:30. Till then, thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Shilpa. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Swati. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nikhil, bye-bye.
Bye, sir. Bye, man. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.